De'Aaron Fox has just been traded to the San Antonio Spurs in a 3-team deal that sends Zach LaVine and multiple picks to the Sacramento Kings, and the Bulls are getting back some salary filler as well as their own 2025 pick, and another big deal that happens right as I'm getting ready to go to bed. So I'm glad that that is the period that we've decided we're going to do this all the time. But hello, everybody. Welcome to Also Rusty Buckets. If you're over on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and drop a like, and check us out over on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you want to enjoy this as an audio-only experience. Also, go check out the newest main channel video. It is about the Clippers' history, their fall. I was going to say their rise and fall, but it's mostly falling. That'll be linked in the description. So first, let's go over some of the details of this move. De'Aaron Fox and Jordan McLaughlin are going to the San Antonio Spurs. Zach LaVine, City Sissoko, I'm not even sure who that is, no offense. 3 first-round picks, although we do have to mention the 2025 Charlotte Hornets pick is lottery protected, which means that's not going to convey, and it turns into 2 second-round picks from that point. So really, this pick is 2 seconds because Charlotte is not making the playoffs, obviously. But they also have the 2027 San Antonio pick and a 2031 Minnesota Timberwolves pick. And the Timberwolves pick is pretty good. I'm surprised there was not a Hawks first-round pick in this deal, but on top of that, there are 3 second-round picks, one of them being Chicago's from this year. So the Bulls also shipped out a second-round pick to make this deal happen. But on the Bulls end of things, they're getting Zach Collins, Trey Jones, Kevin Huerter, and their own 2025 pick from the Spurs. I was actually thinking about this the other day. I believe that pick for 2025 for the Bulls was top 10 protected. And at least at the pace the Bulls have been going, it was very likely that pick would convey between, 11 and 30. Whether they made the playoffs barely or missed it barely, there was a decent chance they were not even going to get their own draft pick out of that. There was a decent chance they weren't going to make the playoffs and not get their draft pick, which would have really stung. But this secures that no longer being a thing to be concerned about, on top of with you moving Zach LaVine. You're at least hopefully going to start to move down the standings in the East. The East is so pathetically fucking awful with so many dog shit teams at the very bottom that it's actually kind of hard to get that high up in the standings of being terrible. But one way or the other, the Bulls are finally heading in the direction that I have wanted them to go in forever. I wish they would have blown this team up earlier when they could have actually gotten some really significant assets out of it. But securing their own pick for sure, getting 3 expiring contracts. Also, it's worth mentioning, Trey Jones and Kevin Huerter are, at least good-ish NBA players. Kevin Huerter has had a rough year and a half-ish stretch, but the first year the Sacramento Kings made the playoffs, Kevin Huerter was the reason behind that. Or not, sorry, that sounds super hyperbolic. One of the reasons. He was a good starter. He has like this crazy synergy with Domantas Sabonis. His three-point shooting was a huge reason why they were at the time the greatest offense ever. But he's been not that great since. He's been kind of booty butt cheeks, and his defense is bad. So he might just be a bad player who's making the kind, I think, like $16-17 million. He could end up being decent enough that you consider re-signing him, and he could be a trade chip down the line, yada yada. Trey Jones is a decent point guard. He hasn't really figured out the 3-point shot, and that's the only thing that I really don't think he has in his bag as a point guard on offense. Like, he's got a good mid-range pull-up game, he's got a good driving game, he's a pretty good distributor. But the 3 ball's bad, and he's a small guard, so he's not much of a defender. So has those negatives. I didn't mean to start with the Bulls stuff, but I've kind of been waiting on a Zach LaVine trade for a while now. So to see it finally actually happen, it didn't even feel real. But on the Bulls end of things, I've seen a lot of people criticizing this deal. I honestly don't think they were going to do a whole lot better than it. Like, freeing up all their salary, they went from having to pay Zach LaVine for the next couple of years to not. They went from having $50 million guaranteed on the cap sheet next year to not having that money guaranteed on the cap sheet. That's pretty good, and not having to worry about their pick not conveying, that is also good. I think it's fine. Not a slam dunk, not the best trade you could have done, definitely. Maybe there was a world where there was something better, but we obviously knew the market on Zach LaVine was very not great. Probably was not going to be something good. And I realize Zach LaVine's been having a really good year, and there's a chance the Kings just get a bargain because of that. But I also know that a lot of the problems that I have with Zach LaVine are still very much present, even if he is hitting his shots more and he's playing more as an off ball player than he really ever has, which I've super appreciated. But nevertheless, I'm glad the Bulls have gone in this direction. This is probably almost certainly going to be followed up with the Vucevic trade. It seems there's a possibility of a Kobe White trade. I would love if there was a Josh Giddey trade, but I don't know if that's going to happen in the immediate future. But on the Bulls end of things, I would give them like a B. Just given the context of the situation, I think they did fine. Now, let's talk about the San Antonio Spurs. Obviously, I kind of poo-pooed the idea of De'Aaron Fox on the Spurs when I made my video kind of reacting to that information. Unfortunately, it was 2 days late, so it didn't do all that well. But De'Aaron Fox to the Spurs, I do like it, but I don't like it. I would like to love it, and I don't. And my primary reason is I just don't know if De'Aaron Fox is quite the level of playmaker that I would have liked to see paired next to Wemby as the point guard of that team. Like, the number one thing to me is I want a dude who throws lobs super well, a guy who I know will find Wemby when needed, and will also have the scoring gravity to not make that a super easy choice. Because, like, Chris Paul, and to a lesser extent, but still the case, Trey Jones, were capable of getting Wemby the ball on the right spot consistently, and that was great, but not as big of a threat with their own offense. So I was like, I would like a Trey Young type of player, generational playmaker. Apparently, fucking Luka would have maybe been an option, but not really, because for whatever reason, Dallas's GM has a love affair for Anthony Davis, but I'm not going down that road right now. I don't even remember where I was at now because I just did that. But I don't love that De'Aaron Fox is this super score first player. I would like Victor being fed the ball to be the number one priority. But nevertheless, the Spurs did just get a lot better, and I'm pretty confident they're going to be in the playoffs. And I'm not going to lie. When you add De'Aaron Fox to this squad, when you go from, and I've been saying that the San Antonio Spurs have the biggest drop off in the entire league between their first from their first player to their second best player, whether it was Sohan, Barnes, Chris Paul, whatever your take was. The gap between Wemby and that player is between like top 10 and not even top 50. De'Aaron Fox is a top 30-ish player in the NBA. Some people would rank him even highly, he's probably top 20. I don't know. I haven't actually considered what my list actually is in quite a while, but De'Aaron Fox is damn good. Not quite a superstar, but definitely a perennial all-star tier player and one of the better scorers in the NBA. I just don't love the long term as much as I would like to, just because I don't know. De'Aaron Fox could also very well just display more playmaking than he ever has to this point, especially earlier on in his career. He was more of an assist man. It was when Domantas Sabonis was there where the playmaking aspect of his game kind of faded. But I don't know. He's not played with lob targets too much. I don't know. It'll be an adaptation. De'Aaron Fox is very good, and he's definitely a plus playmaker. I don't mean to suggest he's a negative playmaker in any capacity. I'm sure they'll figure it out, and the Spurs are like, I'm not going to say contender, because the rest of the roster is probably not good enough unless the Spurs have more moves up their sleeves. But they're not a team that I would want to see in the first round, especially as they're probably going to end up being lower seeded in the Western Conference. If I'm OKC, I don't really want De'Aaron Fox and Wemby in of the playoffs in the first round. Like, I have been saying for a bit now that when Wemby goes to the playoffs, Wemby is going to fucking dominate, but his team's not going to be good enough, so you really can't be like, oh, the Spurs are secretly a dark horse. I think De'Aaron Fox makes them a dark horse team where it's like, yeah, I'm not calling this team a contender, but if they made it to like a really competitive second round, or even the matchup worked in their favor and they made it to a conference final somehow, I wouldn't have my mind blown by that. That would be reasonable. It's also worth mentioning that the Spurs did not lose Stephon Castle in this equation. That's huge. That was a big area of contention that I neglected to mention in my original De'Aaron Fox commentary. A lot of Spurs fans saying that Castle was untouchable. I don't know that was necessarily correct, but the Kings obviously proved that they could still make this deal happen without it, or the Spurs rather proved that they could make this deal happen without it. So, good move for the Spurs. I we'll see how I feel about it a couple of years from now. In the short term, it's just going to be awesome. It's going to be nothing but good. And I'm very happy for Victor Wembanyama because, and I understand the Spurs' urgency to do this as well. Like saying, "Hey, we know you're one of those dudes. Let's go get you some help." Doing it as soon as possible, doing it halfway through year 2 of Victor Wembanyama, that is huge, especially considering like the prospect of for the next 2 years they're going to be able to build this roster with Victor Wembanyama making his rookie contract money. Now, given that he was drafted a couple years ago and the number 1 overall pick, that's still like, you know, uh, tens of millions of dollars into the like, I don't know, 15-ish range, but it's not a supermax. It's not a crazy large contract. So the Spurs have a lot of flexibility. I don't think they're going to be a contender out of the gate off of this trade. I think a good offseason, though, where everything is put in its place and there's just some more pieces there that are genuinely good NBA players, that will be scary. I think the Spurs are going to be very, very good, even if I would rather Trae Young play with Victor Wembanyama at the end of the day. It's great that Victor has this help this early in his career. So let's talk about the Sacramento Kings end of this deal. Getting Zach LaVine is an interesting choice because I just don't know what exactly their end game is in terms of the structure of this roster, because Zach LaVine is not going to replace what De'Aaron Fox does. He might add an extra offensive punch, an extra weapon to this team, but he's not going to bring a similar dynamic that Fox does. He's going to be a three-point shooter. He's going to not be nearly the playmaker that Fox is. Not even the defender that Fox is. Not that De'Aaron Fox is some exceptional defender, but he's certainly way better than Zach LaVine is. So I'm not really sure. Like the Zach DeMar thing is happening again. Apparently, I heard some people saying that DeMar apparently said that he would request a trade if Fox was on the move. So maybe that's going to happen now. I don't know who the fuck would want him. I don't know how that's going to go, but if it would happen. But one way or the other, like, are we doing Zach LaVine, DeMar, and Domantas Sabonis? That's your core? That's the team you want to roll out? Are you for real? That's gross. That's icky, man. That is not an NBA team that I have any interest in tuning in for. The draft capital is pretty good. It's not nothing. It's the Timberwolves pick primarily that's like, that could be juicy because the Timberwolves by 2031, decent chance they're a bad NBA team. So that could end up conveying really high, although it also kind of sucks that easily the most valuable trade chip you got out of De'Aaron Fox here is not going to convey until I will be in my 30s. Ugh. Ugh. I was saying that to be sad about the Kings, but then I just thought about it for a little bit, and it's sad for me too. But we'll see in 2031 if the middle schooler the current middle schooler who the Kings get out of that draft pick ends up being worth it in the long run. But I'll tell you what, if the Kings' goal is to remain competitive and presumably adding LaVine in the process here, it's kind of like you both remain competitive and get some draft capital type deal. I don't know. I think it's a little desperate. I think they're just trying to hold on to being a good team with that move, and it's just not going to work. I don't, you could maybe ask DeMar to do more point guard type stuff. I remember in Sacramento, or not in Sacramento, in San Antonio, he kind of embraced being a playmaker more than ever there. Then when he went to Chicago, the playmaking with Lonzo Ball there kind of made it to where he didn't have to focus on that aspect as much, and then he just ended up getting buckets all the time. But if DeMar becomes a more ball handler, playmaking, less looking for his own offense, Zach LaVine coming around screens trying to get 3-point shots off, Domantas Sabonis, handoff action, screens and stuff like that. Like, that's all feasibly you can make a respectable basketball team out of that, but what's the point? What's the point, really? You should honestly just trade everybody at that point. Like, I don't know. I don't know if getting Zach LaVine in this deal is actually smart. I don't know if that was actually the move. It's interesting the Kings and Zach LaVine actually go way back because back when Zach was eligible for a contract extension. In fact, he was just a free agent outright. The Bulls were not really sure what his market was, so they were like, you go find someone to give you a contract, and then we'll see if we want to match that. And it kind of came down to the last second that the Bulls decided they were going to match the contract. But Zach LaVine was very nearly a Sacramento King that day. And since then, they have been rumored to trade for Zach for a while. So clearly, the Kings believe Zach LaVine is more than most of the rest of the league seems to. So in their head, they're definitely like, we get this win now option and the draft capital. But honestly, I would have just pushed super hard for Castle and said, I don't even need as many draft picks as you're giving me. Just give me that Castle guy, because at least that's a young player to build on. But you really just don't have that here. So running down the list here, on the Spurs end of things, I think, especially given they didn't include Castle, because they only really included one first-round pick that was an actually valuable pick, that's pretty fucking impressive. Like, the 2027 Spurs pick's not going to be good. Everything else is second-round picks, which, as you can draft someone good in the second round, but let's be real, it's really not that important. That Charlotte pick is going to be second-round pick. So this is, to me, that's an A+. I definitely don't love Fox there as much as I would like, as I have repeated a couple of times at this point. But in terms of what they gave up to make it happen, unquestionably great. Honestly, it's so great that the idea that they could regret the Fox trade rings less true to me, because at least they didn't really pay some hefty price for him, and he'd be easy to move later on either way, unless he just gets a career-ending injury or some shit, or something makes him so awful and he's not worth his contract. But I just don't see that happening. So A+ for the Spurs. On the Kings end of things, I think they kind of went in the middle ground here in terms of their assets they got back, and it's a little sad. I think I am going to give them a C+, maybe a B-. It's kind of pending on how Zach LaVine plays there, but I seriously fail to see the point here. And on the Bulls end of things, I think I already gave this a grade, like a B or a B-. Sounds about right. So the Spurs, great trade. Kings, Bulls, you did what you could. Really good trade overall. I like this. This is cool. It's interesting. It's mixing things up. But yeah, it's not quite Luka to the Lakers, but it's great. Trade season is cool. Please do the next one in the middle of the day. Thank you. And good night.